Hey, this is X from T.P.O.T Media. Before we get started with the reading, I just want to thank everyone for their support and their generous donations to T.P.O.T. For those of you who have not yet donated, it's easy. Just go to our YouTube homepage, and in the lower right-hand corner of our flyer, there you can select the Donate to T.P.O.T Media button or the Prophetic Donations button. Click the button and it will bring you to our PayPal page where you can enter your donation amount. We thank you again for your support, and for that support, we will continue to bring you mind-opening content.
Open your mind.
This is X from the T.P.O.T Series Media Group. Welcome to another reading of Akan's Confessions. Open your mind and enjoy. Common sense opens doors for everything else, even if you're educated, whatever it be by schools, the streets, or both. If you have no common sense, you'll find yourself in situations that this basic tool would have prevented. What is also mind-boggling thing, people who lack common sense are usually the ones who don't want to learn anything else, which is a handicap all on its own. It doesn't matter who you are or what you know, for that matter. Never stop learning. Once you've decided to stop learning, you might as well just chop off a hand or foot. Basically, you have limited yourself to what you already know. It seems pretty logical that the more you know, the better off you are. I guess this is the sentiment of really educated people in prison as well. Now, the contingent of so-called educated people, if you will, in prison is very small. While the population of uneducated men in prison is astronomical, nevertheless, there are so many talented people here as well. Artists and writers, singers, songwriters, musicians, you name it, someone in prison has mastered it. I truly believe some of the greatest minds are in prison. Great minds that chose to make not so great decisions. I've seen portraits and drawings that would amaze Van Gogh and Da Gama. Sculptures made out of soap that are perfect down to every detail. Amazing things created by men with incredible talent. At times, I wish I could take them with me when I leave, just to take them to someone I know who could help them make a career out of these gifts that they have. These gifts that they have refined within themselves in this place. I can't help but wonder, with these many talents that these men have, are they a result of prison? Or did this talent always exist within them? Or did it take prison to develop it? We'll probably never know all the answers to these questions, unfortunately. I do know that prison gives you a lot of time to think. I don't think I've ever spent so much time just pandering and pondering in my entire life. I found time to totally work on myself, become the man I've always known I could be or wanted to be. Somehow prison has made me take a look at things that I've often taken for granted. Things like your relationships, your children, little things like the sound of a dog barking, the smell of your wife's cooking, your daughter's laugh. I imagine the key is not so much of knowing not to take these things for granted while I'm here. It's applying it once I'm released from here. I promised everyone and myself I'm going to do things differently. I have to. I know this is the answer for me. This will also minimize the possibility of a return trip to prison as well. Let's face it, if you're in prison, somewhere along the line, you screwed up. I don't think anyone woke up on the day of their arrest saying, I think I'll do something to go to prison today. I mean, these facilities are built for providing penal punishment. They are mostly called, strangely enough, correctional facilities, when in all actuality, very little correction is administered, if any. So the correction must be developed from within the individual. Apart from a few 8-week or 6-week classes, not much rehabilitative programs are offered in prison. Even if they are offered, taken, and completed, this doesn't mean that all is fixed. You can give a person countless hours of programs, classes, services, training. It doesn't matter. If the person doesn't want to do the right thing, he won't. Mainly when these prison programs are taken, it's forced on the inmate. Even then, inmates take these programs to be looked upon favorably by the parole board. Most of them, at least. Most of this stuff doesn't really mean that much to an inmate. It's just a part of the daily grind of prison living. Frankly, prison is like a never-ending dream that you don't necessarily like, but can't awake from, filled with highs and lows that change like the wind. If you're fortunate enough to have a release date, this serves as your awakening. The only thing that predominantly keeps you awake in the real world sense is contact with those in the real world. Mail and phone calls and visits. This gives you at least some hope of better days to come. It's always a lift to hear good news from loved ones. It gives such a sense of content. On the other hand, hearing bad news sends emotions through you that you never knew existed. I guess it's the feeling of helplessness that affects you the most, knowing that no matter what's going on out there, you're here and you can do nothing directly to alter the situation. In prison, news that would usually be taken with a grain of salt normally is now heart-wrenching, worrying about the people you care about, and you can't do anything to help. At times, it can become overwhelming, not to mention all-out stressful. You find yourself hoping and praying that the mail you receive is good news, as opposed to something that's going to give you that feeling in the pit of your stomach. In some way, when you're visited or talking on the phone also, you feel the same way. That's why it's best to not worry about the things in the real world, especially when there's nothing you can do about them. Keep the things in mind, but you can't let them consume you. This makes your time seem that much more longer. I must admit, it's hard to take the I've got my life here and they've got their life at home approach, even though this is a reality we have to accept. Doing this keeps you from getting too emotional or mentally drained. For the most part, no matter what kind of news you receive, you have to take it in and move on, whether you want to or not. Sometimes we tend to forget that even though life has come to somewhat of a standstill for us in here, life for everyone outside these gates is still moving right along. It doesn't pause until we get there. If you are fortunate enough to have people who love and support you, this is a blessing. One thing for sure, you find out who really cares about you when you're incarcerated. People who claim to care about you often expose as feeling otherwise once you're in prison. So-called friends turn out to be quite the contrary once you're behind bars. As in all life situations, this too is a lesson to learn from. You get to see who really cares, especially if you only have a few years to do. Eventually, you will be released, so maybe the people who became estranged during your prison term should remain just that, estranged. Now, don't get me wrong. Blame shouldn't be cast upon anyone. You yourself bear the responsibility for your predicament. However, If you manage to do your time with not so much as a letter from these people, you have to wonder, do I really need these people in my life? Now that you've regained your freedom, you are also free to choose who you associate with as well. Being in prison allows you to take inventory of all the things in your life that are important. Most of all, the things that are not important, whether it be people, places, or things. Over-glorifying prison is not my intention, but once you're here, it's pertinent to use your time wisely, whatever that entails. Using every day spent here to prepare yourself for when you leave here. Practically every day is a chance for you to start preparing yourself to re-enter the world. Most people in prison today will eventually get out. This is a fact. Also a fact is most of them will return. Not for any particular reason other than not changing their thinking, which would ultimately change their behavior. After all, it's not your thinking that gets you in handcuffs, it's your behavior. However, society has a lot to do with this too. Imagine if 30 or 40 years ago, how would this world be? How many prisons were built in those years? Hundreds. Now let's imagine if that many or even half of that number of prisons built weren't. What if instead of prisons and jails being built, schools were built, learning centers were built, low-income housing was built, places for underprivileged and undereducated, poor, homeless, indigent people to go, places for them to learn, grow, develop skills, learn how to do certain things, get an education, learn how to get a job. Now let's fast forward 30, 40 years back to today. Would we even need all these prisons? Of course not. For some strange reason, society seems to think that the answer to crime is build more prisons, which in my view is as ridiculous of an approach as it is, of course, purely retroactive. Wouldn't it make more sense to try to keep people from coming to prison in the first place? It reminds me of when I lived out on Long Island. There was an epidemic of speeding. It was so bad that the police department were beyond their wits trying to solve this problem. So instead of taking the retroactive approach, which meant hiding in the bushes and lunging out with light flashings and sirens blaring, instead they got proactive. The police cruisers started making themselves very visible, parking right in plain sight. So now when drivers saw the police, instinctively, people slowed down. This method worked so well out there that at times there wasn't even a real policeman in the car. At times, sitting in the parked car was a dummy, dressed up as a policeman. Imagine that. Keeping people from breaking the law without even using a real cop. Now that's thinking. Now this kind of thing is brilliant. The point is, preventing crime should be just as important as fighting crime. The two should complement each other. And that's gonna do it for this segment. But don't worry, gonna have another installment coming for you pretty soon. So just hang in there. I know it's getting good, but we want to thank you for listening to another installment of A Khan's Confessions by the T.P.O.T.S series. We'll see you next time. Open your mind.